First, I want to thank you as a Surreal Physics participant for taking this channel on. Our dance floor is both wide and riddled with pools, and I'm casting out all kinds of shiny things and worms alike for you all. So don't worry if it's not all intelligible, as long as something is. If a strange bit of bait hooks, but you want to understand it more, likely a brilliant mind has more material on it on YouTube or somewhere on our collective net of mind that I'm very grateful exists so we can press on here. With so many diverse backgrounds, experiences, and languages spoken in this world, I'm drawing on bundles of diverse threads, as it can be the oddest special obscurity that suddenly reels you in and out to a whole new perspective. To bring together mind and matter from their existing well-established fields is going to take a lot of thread. But to keep mixing fishing and weaving metaphors, to be a fish out of water is not a comfortable thing, and I thank you for joining me for these occasionally deepened swirls and jumps between worlds. They will increasingly come together, and I try to make the experience a not altogether unpleasant one, no matter what kind of thread or bait you like. We left off in our Surreal Physics story in episode -1 pondering the somewhat strange adjoint of no I, which uses the axiom of choice, as many ingenious mathematical inventions like it does, and in this case, to bring together imaginary numbers and the surreals, the latter of which on their surface do not seem to generate square roots of -1 themselves, or rather numbers that when squared give way to a backwards move of any kind. We were contemplating why John Conway and other geniuses like him think and write as they do, as they discover deep mathematical truths about our universe along with the odd inventions quite naturally occurring in our minds, which are themselves quite natural occurrences. Anyway, that when the brilliance of these minds dawn on the minds of others in time, like my own, I know I am continually humbled, but ever more curious, and seeking always a bit more. Perhaps a new view of the old rings of light, whether they're from our sun, our moon, the cosmic microwave background, or what is reflecting in the eyes of the person with whom you share this world. You may think it's pretty ridiculous to suspect impactful problems in vectors, matrices, tensors, and their vector spaces, as we started to discuss in episode 0. After all, we're in the middle of an extended sequence in this series, setting the stage for Clifford and his algebras to help us reconcile some of the unfolding issues, but somehow together with this surreal math that you're probably still digesting, that supposedly holds all of these continually unfolding promises. And that's not all. Indeed, as we've been thematically winking with from the beginning towards the algebraic geometry that will inevitably bring us to topology, that study of shape in yet another abstract formulation, all as a playful spacetime, or whatever we are pointing to at the base of what we perceive of as the universe. But choosing the right tools for understanding is ever only part of the problem. Rather, we need to look to what our various systems of thinking make thinkable, systems the tools happily play into, what ideas are reinforced, and what is rendered silly or made all but forgotten. Not so much a problem for pure math with its cleanest abstractions, but always lurking and rather more problematic in physics and its sometimes murky calculations, endemic to nearly every corner of our landscape of models and theories, is a paradox of completed boundlessness, the full yet continuous continuum, total pies, fragrant and beautiful, but what lures us in is related to an invention of isolations. Now, invented does not mean unnatural. Again, our minds are natural, yet of these we have no comprehensive, let alone well-tested theory on where all minds might reside, let alone how. But clearly we and many other living beings can imagine paradoxical impossibilities, contradictions in concepts held together to bridge infinite infinities of gaps and single fell swoops. In the beauty of a circle or a golden spiral and standard calculus, for instance, tensors also hold by default uncountable infinities of space and time. For our efforts in physics, these infinitely flexible tools, along with their productivity, bring also a distinct stench to the unintuitive success of quantum mechanics and even the elegant beauty of general relativity. These views of the universal elephant have a shared assumption. They share a common continuum, which as imagined all but banishes intuitive time from mainstream science, spatialized as its own isolated dimension, different, and the most independent amidst the rest. The infinitely flexible models, all those Taylor series, the Fourier transforms, the strings, and now many-layered neural networks cling to the arrayed data we hold, and where they make successful predictions, the literature grows. The belief in an infinitely determined universe, uncomfortable at first, settles in as we forget all that we've disembodied. Chaos still looms, but relegated to the strange fringe. What confronts perfection with undeniable indeterminacy, we all but give up on, presuming mysterious and probabilistic weirdness just cuts to the core. The casualties of all of this include causality, free will, even a function, let alone a purpose, for the minds that evolved into the conscious experience that somehow, through its products, stands denied. What we are driving into here at Surreal Physics is that perhaps our decidedly unrelativistic foundational math is a problem, manifesting as the walls of a patchy attempt at perfection. A perfection we actually define to be never-ending. What are we doing to ourselves? Not just in physics, but science and art more broadly. Each perfect fit to the finite and biased samples of an unwieldy elephant locks us further into the sleeper paradox embodied in Hilbert's modernist campaign to unify all mathematical language into one preferred frame of reference, about which Gödel, Church, and Turing all had something to say, building on the tools given to us by Cantor himself. And those numbers you thought you knew, as Conway came to understand them, and increasingly others, like me, paying more attention now to those surely unserious games. Their numbers are perhaps our numbers, suggesting an alternative approach to renormalizing invariance, one that validates the practice of physics as studies and relationship, but even more. This relativistic foundation in surreals deeply generalizes relativity for all that we measure in every way, not as imposed laws on isolated tensors, groups, or higher-level categories, from a simplest of framings, an exchange of moves between frames. The numbers themselves emerge as quite complicated enough structures, along with their sibling games, generating those attractive abstractions of symmetry and composition. Yes, surreal construction in its humble beginnings paradoxically bears a genetics that both finitely instantiates quantized superpositions as well as infinite reflections, the latter pointing to unique structures beyond the finite, towards a day omega, or even on that strange and glorious day of wishful reunion, the superpositions play out in intuitive time, once an actual implementation, in a gravity of moves towards the end games. Compositions truly boundlessly unfold between at least two playful frames of reference, at a minimum. Rational and irrational structures alike flow from no generally preferred frame, no universal definition of winning, even if we must don one hat or the other to read any information. That the modern quest of Hilbert's to find a single hierarchical frame, unifying not just structure, but how we see structure, pales by comparison to the no way. Hilbert's one frame to rule them all rather leads us to uncountable hidden choices, self-sleights of hand, impossible ideas to implement, and timelessness. But such opinions are not universally appreciated, let alone universally computable. The surreal frame of frames, which necessarily involves multiple frames, multiple perspectives, multiple points of view, not necessarily conscious, but they could be. This surreal frame of frames is itself a choice, yet quite circularly offers a path to illuminate all those mysterious choices we make day to day, even in the most mundane moments of limited but true and imperfect freedoms, where partial snapshots of this complex entanglement we call the universe categorically feed the decisions we as frames of frames make when composing our own structures for others. Maybe as artworks, traditional or non-standard rule sets, works of mathematics and sciences, perhaps a kind gesture, or a smile of encouragement, some brutal but necessary word, or a deep belief not necessarily unshakable. All patterns propagating across our minds constructed themselves of simpler structures, all inductively building up from the strange and wonderful empty set at play. But wait, how could nothing be at play? Is it the empty set making all those decisions for you on those options it may even lay before you? Why would the universe, through some natural mechanism like evolution by natural selection, conspire to only give you a false sense of your free will, that you only seem to choose otherwise between this or that? What precisely would evolution or anything in the noise have to work with, especially if this same conspiring universe is also just a bunch of determined randomness, supposedly? Again, the inconsistencies in our standard modern myths are palpable. In this sea in which we seem to swim inescapably with pain and joy inextricable, those coldest stories we tell ourselves, deceptively making us all too certain of our helplessness and loneliness, even in the midst of the tumultuous riot lapping at our senses. Ironically, too, as the most consistent signs point to that massive complex we stare out from, having evolved for reasons, with all those confusing chains of connection and anti-chains of composition, both realized and potential, not all predictable, but all making us nonetheless who we are with respect to everything else, everything, in the vast and unfolding universe. You are not anything else. In a sea of invisible choices, all are important in the grand composition, creating waves, storms, and tranquility alike. Our shared song and dance, deserving of an ever closer look and ever deeper questions. How does it all work? And why should it work at all as it does? Or rather as it seems? And perhaps reframing that famous question of Leibniz, we might see all that we thought was real turn increasingly surreal, realized with greater awareness of our fuzzy, gappy dance, each unique and impactful set of lenses, yours, theirs as well as mine, all precious, seeing and creating value far beyond what we call numeric, irreducible structures, realizing the fullest complexity realizable, always incomplete, yet pining in those simplest of not too simple rhythms, those funny steps to that music of time in space, played with grace thanks to our most mysterious and paradoxically empty set.